and I looked out, and there was this big red blinking UFO.
I can just say this. Something's going on in the woods. Something's going on. They're not dogs. They're not coyotes. What could it be, right?
I had an encounter with a skunk ape, and it completely altered the course of my life.
I found a skull. Are you guys going to want to come build this?
Put him out.
I just see it.
Sightings of a UFO hovering over a barn.
Millie woke up from a dream, and when I went into the bedroom, she said there's a monster on the wall.
They saw that the creature had run through a barbed wire fence. They were able to obtain hairs. They sent the hairs to their lab, and it came back as an unknown creature.
Welcome back, Bizarre Society, to the most bizarre show on the internet. I am the one that some call Shane, a.k.a. El Muy Caliente Original Chingo Pie Grande, a.k.a. the original Shane Squatch.
You got squatched!
No!
And alongside me, as per usual, I have the big bad Buetti himself, El Bonito Fantasma de Muerto, El Grande Melbupapa, Senor Orin Felix.
Yes, Daddy.
Sprinkle.
Oh, yeah!
I extended it a little bit. Do you like that?
I see that you did. That was quite extended. I'm not the most cunning linguist in the world, but did you just describe yourself as the very hot original Shane Squatch?
The very hot original badass Pie Grande Bigfoot. So yes, very, very, very close. Yes. And of course,
Okay.
I called you Bonito. So you're the Bonito Phasma de Muerto, which means the very attractive ghost of death.
Well, that's lighthearted. I guess
I had to
it's
throw
better
that
than
one in
being
there.
the ugly ghost of death, isn't it?
Well, if I was going to go for the whole wrestler intro, they don't just have one solid name, man. They got to have like 3 different names that they get thrown
That
in
is
on.
true.
So, I figured the next best step for you would be, the rather attractive ghost of death. I mean, that's probably the closest thing I could go with after the Big Bad Boo Daddy, right?
It's like the Undertaker from Death Valley or Parts Unknown or whatever.
Hey, don't tempt me. I will start adding something in there like that. Maybe I'll bring in the Undertaker for the next one.
You will add something to the intro. I have noticed that about you.
Hey, it might be a perfect spot for, the other show that we're actually hitting twice for this month, because that one I can get a little bit more goofy on, so maybe I can overkill it with a little bit of an Undertaker intro, but we're not a perfect segue to let them know that show that we have going on twice this month.
That's right. So Bizarre Inquiries, which is our YouTube live show, with how the calendar worked out this month, with the holiday and extra Mondays in the month and just all sorts of shit that you guys don't really care about. We're going to give you 2 episodes of Bizarre Inquiries this month, and our next one is going to be Monday, August the 31st. As always, going to be roughly 7:15 Eastern Time on the Bizarre Reality Media YouTube channel. And you guys be sure to submit questions, videos, inquiries that you want us to inquire about, and also join us in the chat during the episode. And if you guys are interested in being a guest on this show or that one, or sharing your experiences or encounters, or just getting up with us for any reason whatsoever, Shane, tell them how they can do that.
First and foremost, you guys can go outside and you guys can scream, whoop, and I will answer almost like a call. That's always probably the absolute best way to get a hold of me. But, if you guys don't have enough of a boisterous lung to be able to pull that off so that I can actually hear it, you guys can always email me at bizarreencounters@outlook.com, or you guys could always get a hold of me through social media, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. That's also definitely an option too. You guys can also call or text the Bizarre Reality Media hotline, and that number is 313-364-1551, and you guys can call or text that 24/7. And of course, you guys can also, or for all professional inquiries, you guys can also get a hold of us at bizarrerealitymedia@outlook.com. And I know that is definitely a mouthful. So if you guys didn't happen to catch any of that, you guys can find all of that information down in the show description, quick and easy right off of the link tree, I guess. And with that, let's get into the show.
All right, y'all. So our guest tonight is a returning guest and friend of the show. We've got author and researcher Nomar Slevik. And Nomar, thank you so much for joining us again tonight. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And I can't wait to kind of pick your brain and hear what you've been up to here recently.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on again, guys. I appreciate it. Shane, we've talked a little bit more recently, but yeah, I love coming on the shows. So thank you so much.
been a huge gap. We definitely have a lot of stuff that we're going to have to make sure that we catch up on, because I think we've only had you on Bizarre Encounters, I believe, once, maybe twice, and I think we've only covered maybe one of your books on here. So
yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit before we started recording, and I think, Nomar, you've actually had 2 new books come out since the last time you've come on the show, so a lot to talk about tonight. So without further ado, would you mind telling us a little bit about your 2 new books, the first of which I think was about humanoids, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah. So Humanoid Encounters, that came out in 2025, and then In the Pines came out this year. Humanoid Encounters, it's right in the title. But I do play a little fast and loose with it. So there's obviously, like Bigfoot type creatures and aliens, but ghosts are humanoid. So there are a bunch of ghost stories. But I also dive into kind of the fringes of cryptozoology with pale crawlers and puckwudgies and mimics and things like that. So
all the stuff we like, the super weird stuff that not everybody talks about.
yeah, exactly. And doing the research on it, this was, after coming off of UFOs over Maine, which came out in 2024, and that's kind of been like 10 years in the making, if you will. Coming off of that, because it was such a big book, I'm like, what the hell am I going to do next? And I'm looking through all my reports, and like, as it stands right now, I still have like 800 of them that haven't been processed, that I haven't, looked into it all. I've got the crux of the story, but, I haven't done additional research. So even to this point, I still have 800 reports. But, so before humanoids came out, I had even more. And I'm looking through them and I'm like, oh my goodness, I have so many creature related reports. I got to do some sort of creature book, not necessarily a cryptid book, but more in the vein of like John Keel or somebody like that, where I get into the real weird fringes of stuff. And it's not a lot of boots on the ground investigative research. It's give me the weird and the friggin' strange, and I want to share it, So that's kind of the crux of Humanoid Encounters.
Yeah, definitely right up our alley here on the show. So kind of a 2-part question piggybacking off of that. Are all of these encounters from Maine and the New England area? And how did you even begin kind of sifting through that many reports to figure out what was going to make the cut?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, they're actually all from Maine. I do have a lot of New England reports, but I separate stuff into states. And, I live in Maine, so my focus is Maine, but I do collect stuff from New England. But to go through all those reports and trying to figure out like what I want to include, basically the weirder the better, and the longer the better, because there's so many reports where I have like 2 sentences, and it's up to me to try to dig and find more. And some of those reports that I have that are just so tiny and I couldn't find any more information, I didn't feel right including them. First of all, I'm not going to make anything up, and second of all, I don't think it would be serving the story any justice by just having a little bit there. So if it was a longer report, if I had more information and I could dig in and pull more information, either I find the person and I can talk to them. If I can't talk to them, at least I can do some research of the town, of the time frame. Were there any other paranormal events, like a UFO sighting in conjunction, maybe even within that month that the creature was sighted? So that's how I kind of go about it.
So also kind of hopping into some of these stories. And of course, I always have to ask this one on the show, because when you talk to enough people on the show, you kind of hear these commonalities, but the ones that always end up sticking out to you are always the most far off, bizarre possible stories you could possibly find. Yeah. So at least from this one, I at least want to hop into at least one story right off the bat. And I'd love to dive into whatever one you found that you think is probably the most bizarre or strange or most a single type story that you've thrown into this book.
For humanoids, I was really excited to get into more dogman encounters. There's a really famous one from my state of Maine, and it's about the Palmyra werewolves, and they've been featured on the Sci-Fi Channel. Mr. Ballin did an episode on them. So that's kind of like, the Phoenix Lights, the Travis Walton case, whatever, of Maine for dogmen. And I really wanted to go beyond that. I love that story. I've told it before in numerous books from like 2018 that that I was putting out. So that story's been told. I wanted to find more, and I did. And there are some pretty crazy ones. There was one where this gentleman liked to hang out at cemeteries, and he was really into Bigfoot and he was really into ghosts, but he started to become obsessed with dogmen. And so he claimed anyways that he would be at the cemetery and he would see these footprints around. And he claimed that they were quite long and they had claws, and they even had like a heel claw. I forget what you call that, but a heel claw. And so we started staking out the place quite a bit. And he said one night, after doing all this research, he decided to do an incantation to try to bring some of this stuff to life. And he took some cemetery rocks and formed a circle. And he had this incantation that he refused to publish, to tell people like what he did, but it
Probably
involved,
a good thing.
yeah. I would have gone there and done it myself, but so yeah, it's a good thing. So he puts these rocks around and he does this incantation, and then he says that this kind of cloaked or ethereal dog man started like floating towards him, and it was really big, and it started kind of going around the headstones and was dancing around, and he said even the statues that were of Mary or whatever these little statues are that you see in cemeteries, they would start to turn their heads as this dog man was floating around the cemetery. And then in this big thunderous boisterous voice was like, "Why have you disturbed my sleep?" And it was reading like a real cheesy B horror movie. And then he goes on to say that he finally got out of that situation, and then he went home and he swore off contacting Dogman or anything of that nature going forward. But the Dogman told him that it was too late and now he's cursed. So he went home and he wakes up the next morning, and the family is asking him like how his investigation went, and he's like, not good, and here's the stuff that happened. Then he claimed that his son, who was I think maybe a preteen, like 10 to 12ish, had actually passed away shortly after this, and he blames this incident, and then his wife left him because of it and all this stuff. And really hard to believe, obviously, but way too fascinating for me to not put in the book. However, I did kind of let people know that this reads how it reads, so take it with a grain of salt. But in that same chapter, though, I ended up interviewing a gentleman, and this was something that happened about 10-12 years prior from me talking to him. And the way he came at me, like I had been sent an email from him, and he said, and the subject line said kangaroo. And that really piqued my interest. I'm like, kangaroo? Okay. And so I start reading that, he went on this little camping trip with his family, and he ended up seeing a creature. So I get him on the phone, and now we're talking, and I've recorded the whole thing. And he proceeds to tell me that he had just gotten off his late shift. He worked the graveyard shift. So he got home like 6-7 o'clock in the morning. His wife was up making some breakfast, and he had a 2-year-old boy, and he was eating Cheerios in his high chair, and they had a little puppy running around. And he gets home and he's all excited because it's a really nice day. And he's like, "Hey, let's take the camper, go up to the mountain area, and let's do a barbecue and just hang out for the day." And she was like, "Well, you just got out of work. You got to go to bed and stuff." He's like, "Let's drive up there," because it wasn't too far, like an hour, "and I'll sleep for the morning. You can wake me up, around 11 or noon or whatever, and I'll get the grill going and all that good stuff." And she's like, "She's okay." So they get up there, and now he's woken up. Now the grill's going and everything. So it's around noon or so. And the RV's got the awning going. They got tables set up. Mom's inside, and she's like preparing a salad and grilling buns. And he's outside, and he's putting meat patties together and wrapping bacon around hot dogs and all that good stuff. And his kid and the dog are like running around in this open area in front of the grill, and he can keep an eye on them and stuff. So he's grilling, and he looks at the kids, or at the kiddo and the dog, and then something catches his eye, like, I don't know, about 100 yards away in the tree line. And he said it looked like a kangaroo, and it was crouched down, and it had this snout and these pointy ears and really short light brown hair, and it had these huge thighs, and so he thought it was a kangaroo. And as he's watching it, the thing stands up, and he's like, okay, this isn't a kangaroo at all. He said this thing was like 8 feet tall, and its chest was heaving as it was looking at his kid. And to him, it looked like the thing thought his kid was prey and was going to, jump at it at any moment. So he was freaking out. So as calmly as he could, without alerting the kiddo and making the puppy run away, and to not hopefully make this creature come out into the open, he walks out there like, hey buddy, and scoops up the kid, scoops up the dog, and goes back into the RV. Well, mom is like, what's going on? Are the burgers ready already? And he's like, shh, come here. I got to show you something. So she comes over, and they both look out the window of the RV, and he's waiting for her to notice. And she finally sees it and gasps. And what the hell is it? And he's like, I don't know, but we're getting the hell out of here. So They get in the RV, they leave the grill, they leave everything that was outside, and they take off. And he came back the next day and grabbed the grill and everything, and didn't see the creature again. But he thought it was weird that when they went up to that area, because it was a really nice day, it was a popular area, and nobody else was there. And he's like, thinking back on it, hindsight, he's like, I wonder if the locals know about it or something. He thought it was weird that they were the only ones there on such a nice day. But yeah, I thought that was a fascinating story, and much more believable than that first one I told you about.
No, so a couple thoughts about those stories. The first one, you're talking about how it kind of has this sci-fi B-movie type flair to it. Even so, it kind of struck me that there's a lot of small details in there that you see with a lot of dogman type encounters, as far as, like a lot of these creatures are observed around cemeteries and burial grounds and things like that. And then also, this idea of like curses following you if you see one of these creatures. So, still a lot to unpack there. And as far as the second story, something that kind of popped into my mind as you were telling it, and I can't remember exactly what cryptid it was at this point, but I think it might have been the Grafton Monster. Okay. I heard or read when I was doing research for the episode we did on that, that I believe people kind of identified that creature initially as like a kangaroo. So that's the only other time I've heard like a kangaroo associated with kind of creature or cryptid encounters. Don't know if there's anything to unpack there, but just kind of something that kind of popped in my mind as you were talking.
Yeah. What I found interesting about it was his, perception and his perspective, because, he's not used to seeing 8 foot tall dogmen like creatures,
right.
And he saw something that was crouched down. So crouched down, it was probably 4 or 5 feet tall. And it was squatting, obviously, because he saw these really thick thighs, and that's what made him really think of like a kangaroo. That with a snout, would make me think kangaroo as well, So it was interesting that, what was in his mind, like his perception jumped to kangaroo. It was still foreign for the area, obviously, but, once it stood up, he was quite scared,
Well, and that's what we say on the show all the time, is a lot of these cases, it's people trying to describe indescribable things with the best language they have in the moment.
Yeah, exactly. And then that brings to mind, however deep you want to go with it, but like what were ancient people seeing, and calling things in the sky angels or whatever,
exactly.
You get into that.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting stuff.
Sorry about that, guys. I had a little bit of a technical difficulty there with my camera dropping out in the middle of you telling that last story. But I don't know how far you got into the whole dogman thing, but I at least want to make a couple of comments on it. I heard before my camera cut out that he was already kind of making some of the connections as far as some of the weird common traits as far as dogman, as far off as that story may have seemed at first. I don't know if he made a comment on it, but I wanted to make a comment about this whole dogmen following people home thing. And that seems to be this like really big commonality that We've talked to Al Santariga, if you remember talking to him a long time ago about dogmen following him home. And almost everybody that we've talked to who has actually like tried to take the time to, quote, mess with dogman or, get in their territory or try to provoke them, whatever. It seems to be this very common thing for them to follow them home. So talk about a double-sided thing when it comes to dogmen in general. There seems to be this more physical aspect of it and this more like ethereal aspect, but whether or not you want to view it as a curse or something physical, there seems to be this like attachment that these things get when you start messing with them, which, going back into something we've mentioned a lot of times on the show, seems to be a very common like dog trait in general, even going beyond just like dogman itself, but just something that dogs would also be like if you came into their territory and messed with their territory.
Right. That's interesting about the following home stuff. I have another story about this woman who was watching TV kind of late at night, but not that late, like 10, 11 o'clock. And the rest of her family was asleep. She was downstairs in the living room. And she noticed out of the corner of her eye, like something moving on the roof. So from her perspective, the house continued beyond, and she could see the roof from her vantage point sitting in the chair. Something caught her eye moving, and she looks, and she goes on to describe like a wolfman, dogman type creature, but like it's on the roof of her house. So is this like the back end of it? And she had no idea that there was maybe an earlier encounter that it had followed her home, or maybe her husband or a child had an encounter with it and hadn't mentioned it because that sounds crazy. And maybe they didn't mention it, but now it's sitting on the roof of her friggin' house.
So these things also seem to have this thing where it's like once you get into their territory too, they end up following you. So even if they theoretically weren't messing with somebody, but the kids took like a shortcut home or something like that, and they came through the middle of their territory, like it seems like it might be grounds for them to get irritated and start to actually want to follow them or figure out what they're actually there for, what the purpose was. Because even going into this other story that you had mentioned about this like kangaroo type thing, also obviously shares some very similar commonalities with dogman, physically, appearance wise, all that kind of stuff. But even the fact of, this guy's barbecuing, his kids are going and playing in this field, they're not necessarily on their property. They're out in the woods camping somewhere. So realistically, you got the same thing happening where you could be infringing on this dog-like creatures like basking spot or like perfect meadow that's in the middle of the woods. And it seems like, those are the spots that a lot of these animals are territorial over, because that's like, their means of being able to have food, having water, having a good spot to sleep. Like it's their all over resource. It's almost like stepping into these guys' houses and expecting them not to get pissed off about it.
Right. Yeah. And I there is kind of not an update, but an addendum to the Palmyra werewolves, because that incident happened in 2004, I believe. And in 2018, there was a group of friends who were or are paranormal enthusiasts, a group of 4 people, middle 20s or whatever. And they wanted to go camp in the woods where this Palmyra wolf thing happened. And as they're camping, nothing's going on during the, while they're, barbecuing and all that good stuff. But the middle of the night, they start to hear howls and some strange sounds around their camp. And some of them go to investigate, and they see this hulkish kind of shadow kind of walking around the peripheral, almost as if it's defending its territory, just to add on to what Shayn was saying. Kind of interesting.
Very much so. So kind of shifting gears a little bit, Nomar.
Yeah.
So you told us a little bit about your second new book before we started recording, In the Pines, and about how it kind of contains some different type of stories like ghost stories and true crime and things of that nature. We've been covering true crime on the show here more recently. We joked, we've talked about all the cryptid encounters. We've talked about all the big UFOs. You kind of got to branch out a little bit.
Sure.
So we're kind of dipping our toes more into those kind of subjects. Do you have any interesting true crime stories, or one that you'd like to share with us, if you don't mind?
Yeah, there's a few different kinds. There's one of a curious encounter from the early 80s. It actually happened to this couple from Massachusetts who were traveling to Maine, but they were retired and decided to take a trip up to the Bar Harbor, Maine area. So for them, that you're looking at maybe a 5-hour ride or so from their home in Massachusetts. But to rewind a little bit before that trip, Her name was Virginia Douglas. Her husband's name was Frank. And Virginia was a homemaker, but before she had children, she was working at a bank, and that's where she met Frank. Frank continued to work at the bank. I feel like I'm saying a nursery rhyme. And so he worked there until he retired. But during that time, like as they were getting older, Virginia kind of settled into this depression. Frank wasn't, paying a lot of attention to her. He had all of these hobbies and things that he did on his own. He would even take trips on his own, or quote unquote on his own. And so her friends noticed that she was not, the happy or as happy as she used to be. But she started to turn things around when Frank finally decided that he was going to retire, and she was excited that he was going to be home more and they could spend more time together, and she could maybe get into some of these hobbies that he was into. And kind of the opposite happened. He was doing even more things on his own. He seemed to be away from the house even more. And he was taking more trips, but he also got into like playing tennis and all this stuff. So she kind of sank deeper into a depression. And one day Frank happens to be home and she's home, and they're doing some house or some outside yard work. And, it's getting to be, around 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They're both getting tired, but Frank's got to go to the bathroom. So he runs inside, and Virginia finishes what she's doing. And then she goes to go inside. So it was like 10 minutes later, and she goes to open the door and it's locked. So she knocks on the door and nothing. So she knocks on the door and calls out to Frank, nothing. Now she's banging on the door and yelling. She's mad now. She's not depressed. She's mad. So she's like, what are you doing, Frank? Let me in. And he finally opens the door and lets her in. And she's like, you did that on purpose. You're just trying to upset me. Blah, blah. He's like, no, I didn't realize I locked it. I went to the bathroom and then I laid down and da, da, da. And so she was mad and upset, went inside, and they weren't talking. A few hours go by, and Frank comes up to her and says, hey, I'm really sorry about earlier. How about we go take a trip? Let's leave right now. Just pack something quick and we'll go. And it instantly turned her mood around. And she's like, okay, maybe we're getting back on track. So they want to go to Bar Harbor, Maine. They get in the car. They leave around 5:30 that night, and they travel all the way to South Portland, Maine. So that's probably 2 or 3 hours that they're in the car, and they get to South Portland, and it's time to, Frank doesn't want to keep driving. So they get a hotel at a motor inn, and checks in and all that good stuff. The next morning they leave, and they have, another few hours to go. They get to the Belfast area, which is about an hour away from Bar Harbor. Now he's taking some back roads to get to Belfast. So it's not highway driving. It's taking them a little longer. Virginia has to go to the bathroom. We have a department store all over Maine called Rennie's. And she wants to stop at Rennie's to use the bathroom and maybe pick up a few things. So he's like, okay. So he pulls up to the front door and he lets her out. She goes inside. Frank parks and waits. 10 minutes goes by, 20 minutes goes by, and he's like, what the hell? So he gets annoyed and he goes inside, see what's taking her so long. He beelines it to the bathroom, knocks on the door, sticks his head in. Hey, Virginia. No answer. So he's like, great. So now he's walking around the store looking for her. Doesn't find her. Goes back to the car thinking, well, maybe we cross paths and she's waiting at the car for me. Gets outside. She's not there. So he's like, okay, well, I'll wait here a little bit longer. So about an hour goes by. He's like, something's wrong. So he goes inside the store and he gets a manager. He explains everything I just told you. And he's like, can we look around? Maybe go in some areas that, I wouldn't have access to. And he's like, yeah, sure. So he actually gets a couple employees, and him and Frank, and they're all looking for Virginia. They don't find her. So, this has been another hour or two. So Frank is upset, and he's like, I got to call the cops. And the manager agreed. So he calls the police. They come over, explains everything to them. And now the police help him do a search around the not just the building, but now they're looking outside, looking in surrounding areas, because there's a bunch of other stores right in the area. So they're doing a big search and they can't find her. So the next day is Sunday. Rennie's is closed, and Frank asks the manager if they can do a real thorough search tomorrow when the store is closed. And he's like, absolutely. So now it's Sunday. They're looking on the roof. They're pulling stuff. They're pulling product out from the aisles, looking for Virginia. They don't find her anywhere. So police start getting suspicious, and they want to know what happened before this trip. So they call down to, I think it's Lexington, Massachusetts. They call down to the Lexington Police Department. They explain what's going on and said, hey, can you send a car out to their house? And I've called their children. They have adult children, 2 girls. And they're going to meet you there. They'll let you in, and we're all going to look, see what's going on at the house. So they're at the house now with the girls, and the girls notice 3 things. The first thing they notice is that some of the windows are open. That doesn't make sense. They know her parents, they wouldn't go on a vacation leaving windows open, especially downstairs windows. Second thing they notice is the fridge is packed with food, like they just went grocery shopping, like the morning they left. And they know that their mother wouldn't just leave with all this food. And if she did, she would pack some of it for a picnic or whatever to eat, at least the fresh stuff on the way up or whatever they were doing. And then the third thing they noticed, which is much more ominous, was hair and blood by the back door. So now Frank's been taken to the police station. Some detectives are with him, and now they're questioning him. And he's still playing the innocent thing, dropped her off, at the front door, all that stuff. And he's playing real hardball. And, so they can't hold him. They end up letting him go. And now years go by. And nobody knows what's happened to Virginia. Frank is the number 1 suspect. The girls have cut all contact with him because they believe he was involved. And then Frank died. And with it, what happened to Virginia. So to this day, it's an unsolved missing case. But what most people think is that she never left that house in Massachusetts. And one of the really suspicious things, and I don't know why this didn't hold Frank longer with the police, was that he was seen buying lingerie inside Rennie's and put it in Virginia's luggage that he had brought with her, or that he had brought with him to Maine. And there was nothing else in the luggage except that lingerie that he bought. I mean, wildly suspicious. But again, I'm not a cop or a detective, so maybe that's considered circumstantial. I don't know, but yeah, to this day, no charges ever filed, and pretty much everybody thinks Frank did it. But
that's a pretty crazy story, and it seems one of those things that, like, if that happened today, we'd solve that crime in like 10 minutes with like GPS and phones and cameras and everything. No, that's a good one. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it was, it might have been 80 or 82, something like that, that happened. So, yeah.
That was probably like one of the last generations that you'd probably theoretically be able to get away with something like that, because you get into the 90s and then you can start actually kind of tracking some phones, but not too many. But at least then you have some like closed circuit surveillance. But 80s, there really wasn't too much closed circuit surveillance. So it's like, this guy legitimately, if he did do it, probably thought he could drive 6 hours away from the house, pretend like she disappeared over there, and probably had absolutely nothing with him. He's just like, I don't know. I walked into the store. She disappeared. Like, there's no cameras, no worries. Like, I don't know what's happening here, man.
There is a slightly otherworldly aspect to it, wherein a psychic did try to help the police and said she's still in the store. So, not helpful in any way to them. So, yeah, that's that part of it. But I think the surveillance state, if you will, might have hinged upon oh God, I had his name in my head, Adam, with the whole Code Adam thing, and it was the guy that created the America's Most Wanted television show. Like, all that came about because his son got kidnapped and I think was murdered. Right? I'm forgetting the story now. But that was all like late 80s, I think. And that might have sparked the whole, let's get cameras everywhere. So like, because we should be able to, find these kids.
Yeah, we've talked about this a few times on the show, covering a bunch of different crimes, that it's like, it kind of seems like you should have these things, but at the same time, though, it's kind of like questionable on how these things actually kind of came into place. Because, diving into what was one of the recent ones we covered, I think it was Zodiac, where they started actually connecting cases over like different districts and everything like that. So it's like with every one of these giant serial killer cases, there's weirdly enough all these different things that are happening in the background as far as like how laws and everything like that are being written, as far as like what can be shared, what's not being shared. So it's like, I almost often wonder if a lot of these like bigger crimes end up having these like secondary motives to them in order to usher else something in, because otherwise it's just so convenient and weird that every time there's, you know, somebody that's starting off the show that ends up kicking in this whole thing, it's always because of this, you know, prolific backstory. It's never like, you know, they're just an actor that's in like the place. Like, I don't know. It's just weird timing as far as I'm concerned. But even with that one, I mean, it's like the whole surveillance state, they got to try to make up as many possible excuses why it's more of a good idea than a bad idea. But at the same time, we're talking about this on a recent show that as much as, you know, it'd be great to find every single possible kid, it's like, how much of your personal privacy are you willing to give up that, you know, you're being pretty much watched everywhere you go just off of the possibility of, you know, being able to save a kid every once in a while when, you know, like, let's be honest, as messed up as it sounds, a lot of these kids disappearing are done by, you know, some people with some power, so they're not really getting found anyways.
right. And, you know, and it's even bleeding over into our entertainment. And a huge one was last year with weapons and the whole aspect of all these kids getting caught on Ring camera. And it still didn't help them, you know, find the kids in the long run. But it's kind of interesting how that aspect, it plays into our everyday lives, you know?
Yeah. And Shayn, I think that's a good point. And Zodiac is one that we kind of covered more recently, but the thing that I always come back to when we talk about this subject is when we talked about DB Cooper. That's probably been like a year or so ago, but like how many changes in like airline security and procedures and things like that were a result of that case. And it kind of makes you wonder, you know, like Shayn said, is there something going on in the background? And like, this was just a catalyst to get some laws and some things passed that maybe people wouldn't have been so on board with without this, you know, inciting event happening.
Right. And with that case specifically, is there a reason why he was, you know, never caught or found or whatever, you know? Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, even connecting a little bit more into that, I mean, the whole thing with the whole surveillance state with Ring cameras, just to bring that one up specifically, it was like 6 months ago, maybe like 8 months ago, they were saying like, oh, you can use Ring cameras in order to find dogs. You just have to approve this thing that makes it so that, you know, we can use them and it'll look for specific breeds. We won't look at anything else beyond that. Then on the other side, it's like, all right, but, you know, if it conveniently happens to catch somebody that we're looking for, you know, it's just a byproduct of it. So it's like, it's just like a step-by-step normalization. But everybody's going to say, oh, yeah, I want to help find a lost dog, but not realizing that clicking that box, they're also using it for 10 other things.
yeah, exactly. And like, there was a bit of maybe a 48-hour peak of people being like, what? And this is the first time I've heard about it, probably since it was, you know, people were first freaking out about it. That's so interesting. Wow.
Well, for the sake of staying on true crime for at least a little bit, because this is something like, as Orin mentioned, we just started semi-recently really covering on the show, and I know that he's got a few that he's working on that are going to be coming up. Before we dive into the vein of some other stuff, such as, you know, maybe some UFO or some paranormal stuff, because we definitely have to hit some of that, I want to hear another one of these missing person cases or some of these true crime cases, because I find these absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I have a couple. One of them that's maybe kind of a good mix of both, depending on who you ask, is there's supposedly a cursed road up in northern Maine. And I've dubbed it the Caribou Curse. Caribou is the name of the town where this road is. And the road has not been identified publicly for good reason. But so a lot of tragedy has happened on this road, but for true crime specifically, 2 incidents occurred. One of them was some sort of murder took place. And people were trying to understand like what happened and how things could get to this point. But the inciting incident, if you will, was there was this, it was in October, and this gentleman was murdered, and he was a missing persons case, and there were Halloween decorations out, and he was hanging in full public view for weeks before people realized it wasn't a Halloween decoration. It was this person, and he was wrapped up in something, but it looked like there was like a sarcophagus or something hanging from a tree, but it turned out to be this gentleman who had been murdered. And then
there's so many of these cases like this too that, you know, I remember seeing one over the winter that somebody made one that was supposed to look like Christmas Vacation, where the guy's hanging, you know, shaking from the roof and stuff like that. And you always hear about these random people calling on these decorations, and you're like, oh, it's stupid. You know, people are calling on decorations, but every once in a while, It ends up being a real one.
Every once in a while. Yeah.
That's why people call, just off that single case that there might actually be a real one.
Right. And, I can't blame them. But, kids walking by this thing be like, cool decoration, like that's awful and macabre, but also fascinating. And I had to write about it.
Only lasts so long before it gives off a smell, though. I think you can only get away with maybe like a week of that decoration tops before people start questioning the smell.
Yeah, but it's Maine and October can get cold, so I think that was helping it. But anyway, another case though, where this woman who lived on this road and she had this tumultuous relationship with this gentleman and had a kid with him, but they had since broken up. He had been very abusive and all this stuff, so he ends up breaking in to her apartment one night on this road, takes the kid and takes him to the train tracks, which are also near the road, and ends up unaliving himself in front of the child. And so, of course, that's basically like the crux of the story. There's not a whole lot of whys in the unaliving part of it, other than I'm going to screw this kid up because of this toxic relationship I was in with this woman. I mean, it's such strange logic. I'll never understand it, but yeah, those are things that were all happening on this one road. And then there were, lots of other tragedies, more natural than true crime, natural in the sense of a lot of car accidents and, things like that. There was even one guy who was so sick of specifically children traipsing through his yard, like cutting across it, just as a shortcut, that he started shooting at them. He lost his friggin' mind and was shooting at kids, and again, he had a house on this road. But yeah.
It almost kind of reminds me of one of those places that I feel like we used to talk about this all the time on the show, Orin, when we like really first started off, when Jenny was back being a host on the show, about these places that they're not so much that there's a thing that's haunted there or like a creature, but rather like the place itself has something to it. Like the place itself is conscious. And this is fascinating because, again, this is something you don't get to talk about too often, but this almost kind of seems like one of those places that it's like there may not be an exact thing there or something that's taking people over or anything like that, but there's something there that needs to get fed and there's some type of like consciousness to it. And whether or not you want to view that as like bloodshed is like what it's being fed or, it's something that starts to poison the minds of people that are around it because there's just something that's off or something that's, I don't know, breaking through at this specific point. But I don't know, it kind of seems like there's something, if there's only like one or two instances that happen somewhere, maybe it's coincidence, but when you have like endless things that are just so chaotic, like a guy shooting at kids, a dead body being left over on this certain spot, like it almost kind of seems like there's something more going on in that area. Like I'd be curious to know if going on in the future, going back even further into the past, like if there might be even more information on it. And part of the reason why they won't disclose the exact location of the road is because they know that there's something weird about it. And they know that if people go there, that it's just going to cause more issues, because even like the car accidents and stuff, like if there's something that can temporarily like alter the minds of people, I mean, how hard is it for somebody to just temporarily be taken over, not even taken over, but I want to use the, maybe a good word for it is like influenced for like a split second. And all it takes is just that split second of veer off and then boom, you end up causing a fatal car accident. So they're like, yeah, nobody really needs to be in this area that doesn't need to be in this area.
Right. And that's interesting with the area being a consciousness. There was a recent interview with Dr. Travis Taylor from Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. He was on the Y-Files recently. And this is the only place I heard him talk about this. But he has speculated that something like the area at Skinwalker Ranch could be a living, breathing entity. Like the whole area itself. And I was like, that's wildly fascinating. Like this guy is insanely smart. He's got 1,000, PhDs and degrees and all this stuff. And to hear him say something like that was, I thought, really fascinating. And so my girlfriend and I started talking about it, and she was like, the wind, what if that's like the breeze of this, we're ants. We can't even conceive of what that is, you know what I mean? And we're measuring, the weather is the result of moving entities maybe. And that's all we can, we're so small that's all we can measure. We can't measure the actual thing. I don't know, it gets into, a bit of cosmic
I was going to say
entities, if
something
you will.
that's like a higher dimensional being that we can't even fathom them anyways, or
Right,
even perceive them properly.
Right. But that, it's interesting. And, if there's big ones, there's maybe small ones, and maybe there's a small one over in Caribou. We might not buy this road or whatever. I don't know.
And I think that gets back to some things I've said on the show before. Like, a lot of times I don't think, things are necessarily haunted in the aspect that a lot of people do. Like, you're not seeing the ghost of, your aunt or some Civil War general or something. And I think there's just something much more energy and magnetism based going on there. And kind of piggybacking off of that and maybe bringing it a little bit back to some of the true crime stuff we've been talking about. We recently covered the Zodiac Killer on the show. And something that really struck me doing the research for that case is I think it's 4 of the 5 confirmed, quote unquote, killings took place either at man-made bodies of water, on lovers' lanes, or near military bases or former military bases, which is all sites. And maybe this will be a good segue into some of your other stories. But of course, all sites that are associated with cryptid and high strangeness and all these paranormal type encounters. And that was just really striking to me that you've got, this guy going crazy and killing all these people in these same type areas that are always associated with cryptids and high strangeness. And, it gets back to the energy magnetism idea. What's going on in these places that are influencing these events and that kind of behavior?
Yeah. Wow. Fascinating.
Almost kind of makes you wonder if it gets into like some, I know I keep bringing up H.P. Lovecraft on the show recently, but some like H.P. Lovecraft type shit where it's like, if you have these places where like reality is broken or there's like a fracture in reality, what it ends up causing is this like macrocosm of like, like basically like a shattered mind from being around that, basically. Like you end up seeing this concept where it's like, the mad scientist falls way too deep into what he's doing and ends up becoming mad because of it, but doesn't realize that he's going mad. It's the same concept. If you're in these areas where reality itself is broken, your mind is being fractured without you even realizing it. And by the time you realize it, you're too far gone anyways. And it's something that's beyond our ability to fully perceive and understand, because as you were kind of mentioning, it's almost like fifth dimensional, sixth dimensional, cosmic type horrors. And part of the reason why I feel like people aren't familiar with these as much as other creatures, cryptids, all that kind of stuff is because, one, when people do experience things like this, it's extremely hard to describe. There's not really too much of a visual for it. And being an H.P. Lovecraft fan, I mean, you see how hard it is to make any H.P. Lovecraft type monsters into anything visual for movies, for anything like that. So, even people that are trying to talk about stories and everything like that, it's really, really hard to put like a focal point to say, this is what it is, because I feel like a lot of these stories could end up in the, category of like something paranormal or something, I guess you say even like a poltergeist or something like that. But going into also what Orin was saying, like my perception of the paranormal, the more that I've researched all this stuff, is I've pulled away from the typical understanding of the paranormal. And I always bring up this whole concept of the conspiracy of the paranormal, that there's a lot more of an understanding of it than what we actually are given. The average person knows about. Like that's the reason why there's all these paranormal shows and everything like that, is because they want to just keep pushing into this idea that the paranormal is all this goofy stuff. But what it actually is this stuff that CERN's doing, that they're doing with like splitting realities, going into other places, transferring consciousness. And this is what the paranormal really is. And where they're making it seem like it's just, the ghost of your dead grandma hanging out at your house, when that's nothing to do with what they're actually doing over here. They're actually transferring consciousness and distracting you away from what the capabilities could actually be of the paranormal.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of Contact, the movie, and the way the alien presents itself to Jodie Foster's character. Ellie, is that her name? I forget. But it's in the form of her father, because it's much more easier to accept and to communicate with. Some parallels there. It's interesting, which was written by Carl Sagan of all people. So.
And that kind of gets back to the idea of like the phenomenon wearing masks and, presenting itself in different ways to different people at different times. So, yeah, that's a great point and a lot to unpack there. But before we go too far down these rabbit holes, is there any kind of cryptid or UFO encounters that you've covered in your 2 most recent books that you'd like to share with us and our listeners, since that's kind of our bread and butter on this show? I mean, we've kind of talked about some big heady topics, so maybe we can talk about some more normal cryptid alien stuff before we let you go tonight.
Normal cryptid. Well, there's one that I still feel like is the final frontier of the paranormal. It's something that still scares me, and it's black-eyed children. I love black-eyed children stories. Ever since hearing about Brian Bethel in Abilene, Texas, and those two kids knocking on his window, I've been fascinated by those stories. Anytime I can speak publicly, which has been a lot this year, before I get into the story I'm about to tell you, I'm like, show of hands, who here has heard of black-eyed kids? And it's typically just 2 or 3 or 4 hands come up. And I'm like, okay, so I give a little bit of background and I tell the Abilene, Texas story from the 90s and all that good stuff. But we also have them up here in Maine. And a fascinating story happened in, I think it was 2009. Don't quote me on that, but and this woman was sitting in her living room about 10 o'clock at night, cat on her lap. She's reading her book, and her husband is working the late shift, not the graveyard shift, but the late shift. And so she's just chilling, and the cat all of a sudden stands up, hisses, and jumps off of her and runs into another room. And cats are freaking weirdos. So she's like, okay, and continues to read her book. And then a moment goes by and there's a knock on the front door. Well, it's 10 o'clock at night, especially in Maine. Who the hell's knocking on my door, you know? So she gets up like cautiously and like looks out the window, doesn't see anybody. So she's like, okay, maybe the kids are playing ding dong ditch, although they've never done that before. You know, you try to rationalize stuff. She sits back down. She's just about to get her place back in the book again. And then 3 more knocks at the door. It jumps her. So now she's mad. So she gets up and she whips opens the door, and there's a screen door there, but the light from the living room falls on this kid standing on the porch. So she's instantly relieved that it's a kid. And then she's like, oh no, it's a kid. And it's like 10 o'clock at night. Like something's probably not right. So she's like, oh my God, are you okay? Like what's going on? And he looks up at her and he's got all black eyes. And he goes, can I come in? And that instantly puts this feeling of dread through her. And it's almost like he Jedi mind tricked her. Her hand starts moving towards the door to open it, to let him in. And she doesn't want to. She's fighting it. And then all of a sudden she hears a hiss again from the cat. So she turns and looks, and the cat is in front of the door and it's hissing at the black-eyed kid. So this kind of snaps her out of her trance, and she slams the door and locks it. And she's like, oh, you know, freaking out, turns all the lights on, sits up and waits for her husband to come home, which was going to be another like 2 hours. And so she's like holding the cat, and she's got the TV on to distract her. And so he comes home and she tells him everything, and he believes her, you know, like she doesn't make stuff up like this. It never came back or anything, but all these years later, when I was talking to her, she's like, I still don't understand what happened, what this black-eyed kid was. And for weeks, maybe even months after the incident, the cat was even skittish walking by the door at night, which she thought was really crazy. But yeah, that's a story from here. It scares me. Now, there is a personal piece to it. That same year, in that same town, I was at a friend's house, and it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and we had watched a movie and all that good stuff, and I was leaving. So I take off, and now my friend is doing their evening ablutions, you know, brushing their teeth and all that good stuff. And then they go lie down in bed, and they always put like a TV show on or something to fall asleep to. And as they put the show on, they start to hear this really soft but incessant knocking on their back door. And they're like, is that Nomar? Like, they would just text me, but all right. So they get up and they go look out. They walk across the hall. There, you know, it's a 2-floor place. Walks across the hall and looks out the window that overlooks the parking lot. And my car's gone. So they know it's not me. And all they had to do was look down, and they could see the back porch where the knocking was happening, which was still going on, mind you, while they're doing this. But they refuse to look down. Don't blame them. They go back in bed and they text me and be like, you're not outside knocking on my door right now, right? And I texted him back because it took me like 5, maybe 10 minutes to get home. And I texted him back and I was like, no, I just got home. And they proceeded to tell me everything that I just told you. And they're like, the knocking's still going on. And then it finally stopped. It went on for like 2.5 minutes. That's crazy. That's a lot of, So I'm wondering, they never went down and looked or anything, but my mind went to, was that the Black-Eyed Kids? Yeah. And did I share the backyard with them for a brief moment while I left? And they went and knocked on the door. I mean, it's anecdotal at best, but it was a scary moment, though, in hindsight, which is kind of weird. I don't typically get scared in hindsight, but in hindsight, I was like, whoa.
No, I think that's a really cool story, and the personal connection just makes it, all the more interesting. The Black-Eyed Kids is a subject we haven't really covered specifically on the show, but it's something I'm really interested in, especially with a lot of connections with like vampire lore, and a lot of people have even connected the Black-Eyed Kids to like the Men in Black, which is a subject I'm really fascinated with. So I think there's just a lot to unpack there with the Black-Eyed Kids. So do you have any, maybe larger thoughts on the Black-Eyed Kids, what you think they could be or could represent?
I'm really with everyone else. Like the more stories I read and the more information I get about it, my opinion kind of morphs or changes with it, but to me, like all of the having to be invited in type of thing is very vampiric, like you were saying. But also there have been stories where black-eyed adults in black suits are standing like by the car while a child is up knocking on a door. And that really reads like Men in Black type of thing. And, the alien side of Men in Black, if you will, as opposed to the G-Man or whatever. But yeah, I have no answers, no general thoughts other than it's weird and it's scary and I don't know what the hell it is, but I really like the idea that it could be, or like there's aspects of vampiric things with it, but also extraterrestrial type of things with it, but also really like uncanny valley type of stuff kind of plays around with it. So yeah, there's so much going on with it and such little study of it, if you will, even though David Weatherly, I feel like, who's exhausted the subject matter, still hasn't gone to the bottom of anything, because all we have are these little pockets of strange stories. We don't have any analysis like with Bigfoot or even Dogman or some of these other things. I feel like we know more about the friggin' Fresno Nightcrawler than we do Black-Eyed Kids.
Well, and what's so interesting about a lot of the Black-Eyed Kids stories to me is, like you said, they're just these little snippets most of the time, but how consistent they all are. Like, it's everybody basically telling the exact same story. It seems like there's very little deviation there, which, like you said, whether it be, Men in Black, vampires, whatever, there seems to be something legitimate going on there.
And it doesn't appear that any place is sacred or any type of person is sacred. Like, this has happened on military housing areas, military like apartment complexes. But also there's this one story. I'm not going to get all the details right, but the crux of the story is a policeman, 2:00 in the morning, whatever, he's responding to a domestic dispute, somewhere in this neighborhood. And he's actually at the tail end of that. And he's sitting in his car and he's writing some notes or doing whatever he does on the computer. And he looks up in the house next door. He can see 2 kids knocking on a door. And he's like, well, that's not good. 2:00 in the morning, 2 little kids. So, he gets out to go see what the hell's going on. And he goes up to the porch. And he's like, hey guys, like, what's going on? Are you all right? And they're not really looking at him, but like, yeah, we're fine, mister. We just need to like go inside here. And he's like, guys, seriously, what's going on? Look at me. And they turn and look, and he's got, these kids got these big black eyes. And he's like, what the hell's going on? And then, so he's like, do you live here? And so he starts knocking on the door. He's like, police, somebody come to, and he looks down, the kids are gone. And he's like, what? And then finally, this old woman answers the door, clearly had just woken up. And she's like, what's going on? And he was like, do you have grandchildren that should be here right now? And she's like, no, like, the hell are you talking about? I forget all of the ancillary details about it, but that's kind of the crux of the story. But that's like, there's a police officer who kind of like intervened in one of these stories. It's wild, and they didn't know what to make of it.
And I think it's interesting you mentioned, like these accounts happening on military housing and things like that. Where I grew up in eastern North Carolina, there's a very large, prominent military base there. I've talked about it, on the show and, different interviews and things like that I've done in the past. But there's been at least a couple of black-eyed kid, stories that happened either on this base housing in that general area that I've come across. So, strange connection there, like you said, but just something that made me think of when you were talking. So sorry to kind of derail us there.
No. And, talking about military housing, there's this really strange event. I just got this story maybe a month ago. You guys know Albert Rosales? He's like the humanoid encounters guy. He did the forward to my book, Humanoid Encounters, but he's like the humanoid encounters guy. He's got like a series of books, and it's all like a date range, and it's from around the globe, all of these crazy humanoid encounters. And he was a big inspiration. So like if I'm writing a book called Humanoid Encounters, Albert's got to write the forward because like he's the man with that stuff. He sent me a story recently where this was in a military base in northern Maine, and this was way back in the day because the base isn't there anymore. But this was, I think, like 52 or 55, something like that. But everybody was out. They kind of had like a free night, but this guy wasn't feeling well and he was staying in. And he starts to hear like this kind of like really loud banging going on. He's like, what the hell is that? And so he kind of gets up and he's looking down the hallway of like this corridor where they all live, but it's empty and it's just him. And it's got like these kind of grayed out windows, and he can see this massive hulking thing like walking by the windows, and then there's like a boom 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 as if it's knocking on the door, and he's like, what is happening? And then the door opens and he said this gigantic red-haired man, like gigantic, like he thought this guy, like picture the Incredible Hulk really, but like a friendly face, dressed like kind of normal civilian, and red hair. And he kind of has to like duck under the door frame to walk in. And he sees the guy and he's like, hey, and he kind of had this weird voice, and he said somebody's name, and he's like, no, man, no one hears his name. This is a military base. Like, oh, all right, thanks. And like slams the door, boom, 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 and like walks away. It was such a strange encounter for this guy. Like, I just love these really, really odd things that happen just like that. Dover Demon's one of those, like that's a beloved story of mine, and that happened so quickly. And
that last one almost kind of sounds like a giant at first, but like the whole red hair giant, like you almost had to ask the guy if he had like 5 fingers or 6 fingers and 6 toes. But
right.
I want to bring up this comment before we got too far off of the whole like black-eyed kids thing.
Sure.
And this could definitely parallel the whole alien extraterrestrial aspect of them, but on the other side, it's just possibly like a little bit different of a viewpoint to view them in. I haven't heard too many people throw the idea about the whole like, when people talk about the whole contract aspect of them, they frequently talk about the whole like vampiric aspect of like, having to have permission to enter, blah 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 blah. But the other part that we hear about this regularly getting into this type of research is these whole these interactions with demons, or whatever you want to call them. Demons, like I said, it could be extraterrestrials, depending on which like lens you want to view these things through. But they're very, very to the point. They almost like stick with these like specific like laws, regulations. Like they're extremely bureaucratic with the way that they do things, and that seems to also kind of parallel how these black-eyed kids are, as far as having to have permission to be able to enter. And then the other aspect of it was the fact that you had brought up the fact that sometimes they're seen with people with suits, and the people with suits almost kind of remind me of what people also kind of relate with some of these like demonic type interactions, but again also could possibly be paralleling some of this like extraterrestrial type stuff. But I guess as an additional continuation question to this, I'm kind of curious, and I don't know if you've come across any of this. Has anybody ever like tried to like call for Jesus or anything like that in the instances of coming across these black-eyed children? Because when you bring that up, there's a lot of these extraterrestrial cases where, regardless of your belief system, it seems to be this thing that works where people will call out to Jesus and they'll make the aliens like release them, go away, whatever. So I'm kind of curious if the same instance would work in the whole aspect of the black-eyed children's. And if so, like, again, there's either this connection with demonic and extraterrestrial being the same thing, or maybe we're talking about another possible variation of what these things could possibly be.
Yeah. That's interesting. There's one story I know. It's had to have been documented elsewhere in some other stories. I mean, I just imagine. But there's one story I know where I think the Lord's name, and I can't remember if it was God or Jesus, like what specifically was said, but it was kind of like yelled out almost in like a save me, like or I need mercy type of thing. But it's this wild story. It kind of reads a lot more like that Dogman in the Cemetery story I told you earlier. But this guy had mistakenly let these two black-eyed kids in his house, and his wife was there and his two kids, and they ended up murdering his family. And god awful descriptions would, I don't have to get into any of that here, but towards the end of it, when I think it was his children that were being killed, and he could hear like bones being crunched and all that stuff, he's like, dear God, like,
did these things just like go crazy or something? Like, not to get, if you don't want to go too far into the descriptions, like these things transform? Did they go crazy?
No.
Did they turn into like primal creatures? Like what is like the visual of what happened with these black kids attacking people?
Conveniently, like he was never in a room when they were in a room attacking something, again, conveniently. But yeah, it almost seems like they went feral because he heard almost like they were like running across the walls, and, were breaking limbs with their hands and all that stuff. So
are the black-eyed children related to the GATE program? Is weapons actually soft disclosure for what the black-eyed children have actually been for the past like 20 years that we've been talking about?
Just nailed it.
And those guys in suits are actually testing these weapons out to see if they'll work? Like, come on now, man. Like, we're getting onto something
you guys,
here.
we're going to get shut down, Shane. You got to stop, man. Oh, my God. But yeah,
that's why you got to know how to speak Russian in the GATE program, is because sometimes they got to drop you in other countries. So, I mean, we got to start looking into black-eyed children cases in other countries to see if it actually works, and people see who actually let these things in and see what ends up happening. And if they can actually tell the story afterwards. Because if not, perfect weapon, man. Like, you put your guard down completely for children.
You do. You really do. So yeah, that's the only story that I can think of. But again, that was like, while like chaos was ensuing, he's like, please make it stop. And, but yeah, take that for what it is.
Well, I think I vaguely remember hearing one other story about a woman letting in the black-eyed children, but I think the story basically ended with her like saying that they like she let him in, and she was like, she felt uncomfortable, like asked him to leave, and then they just kind of like disappeared, which goes into another like common motif that you were saying with these things disappearing. But you don't really hear too many cases of people actually letting these things in.
Yeah,
I didn't mean to step on your.
Oh no, you're all good.
That one in there.
So some of the accounts that I've heard of people letting them in, somebody developed skin cancer, I guess weeks after, when there was like no sign of it. Again, you take that with a grain of salt. And then there was, I think, a death, like there was a motorcycle accident like a couple of days later following, the black-eyed kids letting them in. So it that's more curse-like, if you will, another curse aspect.
It seems like we've been talking about curses a lot on tonight's episode, so kind of the through line, but kind of something on a lighter note before we let you leave here tonight, Nomar. So before we were recording, we were talking a little bit about something that we said we were going to talk about when we started recording. So I think maybe you purchased one of these Dogman baseball hats that Shane has as well, and I believe you had something about that you wanted to share with us.
Yeah. So Shane was saying, like, I bought the hat, but I'm not wearing it, and he half expected me to like be wearing it, but he never sees me wear a baseball hat. And but a funny thing is, like, growing up all the way to maybe, I don't know, in my mid-20s, I always wore a baseball hat, and I have such an affinity for them. I have a couple of old Expos hats that I'm really proud of and really like. I really like the royal blue color as well, and so these Expo hats are like blue. Also, the LA Dodger hats I really like. Not that I like the team, but I really like the color of it, and I like the simplicity of the Dodgers or the LA being on there and all that good stuff. But yeah, up until I was like 25, I always wore a baseball hat. But I think that had a lot to do with my insecurities and my anxiety. And, I have a full head of hair. There was, there's no reason to cover it up. But
a luscious full head of hair, if I do say so myself.
Almost as luscious as the voice.
I appreciate it, fellas. I do. But yeah, that's all I was going to say, that I actually used to wear baseball hats constantly for like the first 25 years of my life. And for like the additional 20 years afterwards, I stopped wearing them for whatever reason, but I still collect them. I have one that says Nomar Slevik on it that I had made at a mall one year at the urging of somebody that I was with. I also used to specialize in wearing mail carrier hats, with the post office badge. I had a buddy whose mother was a mail carrier, and I was like, I love that friggin' hat. And she gave me her old one because she got a new one.
Talking about the safari style hats?
No, it's just a baseball cap. Sometimes they're...
dang, I could see you in the safari style ones, like the ones they wear for during the rain.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Please tell me your scary stories.
On behalf of the U.S. Postal Service.
I would definitely be telling that guy all my stories, man. That guy's got some balls if he's wearing that hat and coming up to you like that.
Yeah. I also have this for you.
Well, that's why the Postal Service can't get the mail delivered. They're doing surveys on people's scary stories.
Yeah,
we need to figure out the bottom of dogman to know why dogs hate us so much.
There you go.
Yes. Wow. That's good stuff. That's a good way to end the podcast. That was awesome.
Well, I guess kind of starting to wrap up then, since that was weirdly enough a perfect leeway at the end. We, of course, have to let everybody know where they could possibly go and find all of your books, where they might be able to give you some more stories to possibly go into future books, because, of course, you can never have enough stories to be able to collect for your database.
Yeah.
Where can people come and find you? Where can they drop off these stories with you? And where can they come and get your books from?
Yeah, so if they want to get real specific, allmylinks.com/Slevik, or just Google search Nomar Slevik. My name's right on the screen right here. It's such a unique name that all my stuff's going to come up. If you're feeling lazy and just want to Google it, you're going to find everything. But specifically, allmylinks.com/Slevik, that takes you to my books, takes you to my documentaries, my music, my podcast, all the stuff that I got going on.
Perfect. Well, perfect, man. We really appreciate you making the time to come on today. As per usual, it's always fun diving into all of this strange stuff with you. And it's always fun that not only do you have stories to share, but we're always able to get into these different weird rabbit holes and trains of philosophy branching off of these stories, because, some people just collect the stories, but other people really kind of get into the whys for these stories. And I really appreciate that about your research, is that you're not just one of the people that collect things, but you also want to discuss and try to figure out why these things could potentially be happening.
And at the very least, because I'm not used to finding answers, so at the very least, it's a fun conversation to have. So,
well, and this has been
Thank you.
A great conversation tonight, Nomar. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. Hopefully we don't go a year plus without talking to you on this show again. I'm sure by that point you'll have a couple more books published that we can talk about. But as always, a pleasure, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. Take care.
Mm-hmm. All right, if you guys are interested in supporting the show and all the hard work that goes on behind the scenes, Shayn, tell them what they should not forget to do.
First and foremost, you guys should definitely go and check out our Patreon. We got one tier over there where you get full access to everything that we got going on. Only $2.50 a month, cheaper than a bag of chips, cheaper than a can of soda, all that good stuff. You guys can support the little guy in the process. And with that, of course, you guys will get this show. You guys will get Inquiries of Our Reality, early access to Bizarre Inquiries, all that fun stuff. And if you guys want to see what it's about, there is a 7-day free trial available. And if you guys like it, hopefully you guys will end up sticking around.
And you guys can also check out the Bizarre Reality Media merch store with t-shirts starting at the terrifyingly low and oddly specific price of just $15.68 plus shipping. Gee willikers.
And I know that times are tough out there, but if you guys would like to support the show in some other ways, you guys could definitely go and leave a review for us anywhere that you guys happen to listen to the podcast. And Orin, what are the general rules for that?
1 and 5 stars only.
And with that, of course, you guys will get either our love and appreciation, or you guys will get our ridicule. But either way, we'll have fun with it, and it's always a great way to help support the show.
And you guys can also share the show with your friends, your loved ones, your family, your enemies, anybody that you think would like the show or not like the show. We don't really care. Just share it with somebody.
And if you guys would like to keep up to date on the show, Orin, how can they do that?
Just do all the internet stuff. Do the Instagrams, the Facebooks, the TikToks, all that shit. You know how the internet works.
And of course, you guys can catch live shows and video content on the Bizarre Reality Media TikTok, YouTube, and Rumble channels.
And if you guys have some free time, please check out our friends and sponsors of the show and show them some love. We got our buddies Rick and Hans with I Know Squatch for all your squatchy gear needs. We got our buddy Joe with Cryptoteology for all your wearable cryptids. And if you guys are curious about the unknown and the unexplained, and you find yourself intrigued by the mysterious and paranormal side of our world, you should definitely check out our buddy Diego's 2 podcasts, Let's Find Out with co-host Diego, and also his bonus Overdrive Wednesday. Diego, great guy, friend, family of the show. Definitely check him out and show him some love.
You guys will find him easy because he'll be pointing right at you.
That's right.
And if you guys have just a little bit more time, don't forget to go and check out our friends with affiliate links. We got Dimension Devices for all of your paranormal investigating equipment. And we also have Sticker Mule if you guys need any stickers, t-shirts, anything printed for any of your local businesses, podcasts, any of that kind of fun stuff. And we do have some additional discounts and credits available for you guys, available down in that show description so you guys can find it quick and easy.
And as always, everything we've mentioned is in the link tree in the show description.
And just like I have to remind you guys every single show, because if I don't, I'm afraid that you just might forget, always, always remain and stay bizarre, bizarre, bizarre.
What in the hell is a black-eyed kid?
I kick ass for the Lord.
Oh my God, what the fuck is that, bro?